Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, partnering with donors from all walks of life to improve southeastern Virginia through grants, scholarships, and leadership initiatives. Learn more at hamptonroadscf.org.
Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. On May 1st, President Donald Trump signed an executive order calling for the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to, quote, cease direct funding to NPR and PBS, including canceling current funding and eliminating future funding. The order also calls for federal agencies to review and eliminate any existing grants or contracts that provide funding for NPR and PBS. So what does this mean for the future of public broadcasting in America? Senior leadership with WHRO Public Media. Join me to answer your questions. Another View will be right back after this national, regional, and local news from NPR and WHRO News.
Discussing today's topics from an African-American perspective, this is Another View.
Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. Proposed funding cuts by Congress to NPR and PBS is not new. As far back as 1969, Fred Rogers, creator of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, testified before Congress to protest cuts to public media proposed by the Nixon administration. But no other president has issued an executive order to cease funding for public broadcasting until now. President Trump has ordered the Corporation for Public Broadcasting to cease funding for NPR and PBS. Now, what does this mean for WHRO Public Media? What about other public media stations in Virginia and across the country? And how are CPB, NPR, and PBS fighting back? Here to give us perspective and answer your questions are Bert Schmidt, President and CEO of WHRO Public Media. Hey, Bert.
Hey, Barbara. It's so good to be back on the show.
Yeah, it's so good to have you. Absolutely.
Usually it's an anniversary show when I'm on for it.
Yes, how about that? Heather Mazzoni, Chief Content Officer here at WHRO. Hi, Heather.
Hey, thanks for having me, Barbara.
Thank you so much for joining us. Yvonne Allman, who is Chair of the Board of Directors for WHRO Public Media. Hey, Yvonne.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
It's good to have you back. Absolutely. And joining us by phone is Maurice Jones, Vice President of WHRO News. Hello, Maurice. How you doing?
Hey, good to be with you. Thanks for letting me join you.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much. So, Bert, let me start off right off the bat. As of today, has any federal funding been pulled from WHRO?
No. The threat is there, of course. The executive order says that federal funds can't be used directly or indirectly for PBS or NPR. The way the funding works is the federal funding goes to the Corporation for Public Broadcasting. They, in turn, distribute most of those monies to stations. And then there's some other services that they do, like a, if you will, group buy for all the stations rather than having all the stations doing it separately. And so they, very little, if anything, goes from CPB to PBS and NPR. That's the direct part. The indirect part is we as stations, we pay our PBS and NPR bills. When you listen to us on pledge drives, we say we have these expenses. When you become a member, your membership dollars help us pay for PBS and NPR. Mm-hmm. Right now, we can't use our federal dollars for PBS or NPR. Fortunately, at WHRO, we've got members. We've got 25,000 or so members. Mm-hmm. And their dollars during pledge drives pay for that programming. So the concern, of course, is we've never been told how we can use our dollars. So imagine a world, regardless of administration, that starts telling us how to use our funding. Now you start becoming state-run TV, that we must cover something or can't cover something. That's a world we've never had to go into. The way we were created back in 1967, they created the Corporation for Public Broadcasting as an independent corporation, independent from government influence. And then we're 2 years forward funded. So Congress has already approved our funding for the next 2 fiscal years.
Through 2027.
Right,
Correct.
right.
Mm-hmm.
So the budgets they're talking about today are for us, even though they say it's FY26, for us it's 28 because it's 2 years forward funding.
Okay.
So where we stand today, and boy, oh boy, every day things change, but where we stand today is we will have our funding, and if nothing changes, we just can't use it for PBS or NPR, which is why it's more important than ever that people become members. I'm going to turn this into a pledge drive before we're done today.
So there was also, though, conversation about the Trump administration putting in a rescission.
Right.
I can never say that word correctly. Rescission memo, basically saying, no, we don't want you to forward fund, and we want to claw that money back.
They want to claw the monies back. The monies that were approved for the next 2 years. The word was that there would be a rescission, that Congress would vote, and all they needed was a majority. And if they voted to rescind, we would lose the funding that's been already approved for the next 2 years. Frankly, that's what most of us in public media leadership thought was going to happen. And we at WHRO have had plans in place to react to that. As a smart business person, you look at both the revenue and expense side. We have revenue plans and expense plans. That hasn't happened. We're still going to be looking at revenue and expense plans because we always want to be good stewards of people's funds to us. But the urgency of losing almost $2 million immediately is not there at the moment.
So that memo, then, is it still going to go to Congress, or is that dead?
I don't know.
We don't know
There's
yet.
Speculation about that. It could. Rumor is I got a memo from our lobbying folks just in the past hour saying they believe that conversation is still happening between the White House and Congress. Are the votes there? Because what would happen is the House would have to vote, and we know it's a very close vote. And so local elected officials would have to determine whether or not they want to take our funding that's already been approved away. So we want to make sure that our elected officials locally are supporting WHRO, because this doesn't defund PBS or NPR. This defunds stations. Yeah. And so we hope that all of our elected officials in our region are supportive of WHRO and all the services and programming that we provide to the local community, and would vote to not rescind our funds.
Heather, one of the parts of the executive order, though, was also for departments, federal departments, to look at whatever grants they may be giving to NPR, PBS, and Department of Education has pulled back their grant, the Ready to Learn grant. Does that affect WHRO? First question, and then secondly, what have you heard from other PBS stations about children's programming? Because we know how critical that is to our air and to our community.
Absolutely. And we've had Ready to Learn grants in the past. We no longer have using Ready to Learn.
Not currently, but we have.
Not currently, but have in the past. But, Barbara, to be honest, we're starting to see the ramifications. KSPS, got that right? Yep. Okay. has just canceled free summer camps for children in their local area because those were funded through the Ready to Learn grant. We also look at the programming that we have through PBS. A lot of the Ready to Learn grants fund PBS programming and the research that goes into them. So there is a concern with that going away, that's going to hurt what we broadcast locally here.
Going forward. So, Maurice, I know that you're sitting there waiting patiently. One of the other things that the executive order says, it says that the CPB Board shall cease direct funding to NPR and PBS consistent with my administration's policy to ensure that federal funding does not support biased and partisan news coverage. Now, my question to you is that the goal of WHRO News, to provide biased and partisan news coverage?
No, that's not the goal. The goal is to provide quality, focused local news that is unbiased, that helps folks get jobs done that they're trying to do in their everyday lives. It's to cover their local schools, their local governments, to cover transportation, to cover, in our area, military and veterans. There's no aspiration to be biased in any way. The goal is to give people information to make great decisions for their families and for their communities and for our region. So That's our aspiration, and that's what we get up every day pursuing.
Absolutely. And we hear that a lot, Bert and Heather, in particular, even before the news, for our local news department, that NPR in particular would have leans more liberal. How do you respond to that?
Well, I'm not going to try to have, I don't represent NPR or PBS. We've got folks that do that. But where I sit, and I've been in this business now 33 years. Oh, yes, I know I'm old. But depending on which party is in power, I regularly hear from people who are upset if we challenge people in power. Today, Republicans are in power, so we're hearing from Republicans saying, how dare you? But back with whether it was Biden or Obama, we would hear the same thing saying, how dare you challenge our president? So we get it kind of both ends. We get it trends based on who's in leadership, but the role of journalism is to check on those in power. And so if you're doing your job well, there will be people who might be upset that you're actually checking on what things are being said, what administrations are doing, regardless of which party it is. So I've been hearing that for a long time, and people want their story to be told the way they see the world.
Right.
And I know our journalists, and I believe the folks at PBS and NPR, their mission is to serve everybody in as good a way as possible. Are they perfect? No, of course. People are human. Sometimes it doesn't go as well as maybe it could.
As expected. Yep.
But I say when you look at media, especially at the national level, there's very little that you could say does a better job in covering our country in a patriotic way than public media.
Down the middle, 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. What questions do you have for WHRO Public Media leadership? And also, what are you thinking about, or have you given any thought to what it would mean if public media was not available here in our country? 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Yvonne, you're chair of the board.
Yes.
What kinds of conversations is the board having in terms of just being aware of what's happening and the ramifications potentially that it could have on WHRO?
Well, Bert and his crew are definitely educating us because most of us on the board come from all different industries. We have a lot of people coming from education, colleges, and businesses. So we're being educated, but everybody on the board has a love for public radio, public television, public WHRO. So we realize the importance of having that information and that programming available.
So, Bert, what's the percentage of federal dollars of HRO's budget?
It's about 9%.
So about 9%. So if it went away, let's just say, worst case scenario, what would be affected?
Well, it's a little speculative because, of course, I would try to fix a lot of it on the revenue side. As any business person, you want the revenues and the expenses to match.
Yes.
And ideally, you wouldn't have to cut a lot of things. But I can tell you, federal funding allows us to do things that if I was a for-profit broadcaster, there are things we simply wouldn't do. We've provided a signal to the Eastern Shore and the Northern Neck, and we lose money there. But we have a mission. You're around back when we expanded our signal. Mm-hmm. We could do that because we have a mission to serve we define our region as the 21 school divisions that own us. And so we want to make sure we provide a broadcast signal to all those regions. We lose money, but we have a mission, and the federal funding allows us to make this happen. I go back to when you and I first talked about this very show.
Yes.
And we talked about the mission of serving the African American community and what should we be doing to serve this community. It was never talk about how can we make money off of that community. Sure. It was how can we serve them better. We brought a bunch of African American leaders together and ended up becoming another view. First the TV show, then the radio show. But it's because we are a nonprofit and we have a nonprofit mentality, and because of federal funding, we can afford to do things sometimes that lose money. Children's services, all sorts of things we do for young kids. Don't make money at it, but it's part of our mission. Those are the kind of things that would be at risk if we lose federal funding someday. Let's hope that doesn't happen.
Right.
And I think why we always see, we are often not in the budgets that a Republican president presents. In Trump 1, we were never in the budget. In Bush terms, we weren't either. But because everybody loves their local station, we get bipartisan support in Congress, and they always make sure our funding gets back in there at some level.
So what are the other GMs telling you that you talk to, especially for smaller stations? Because I know before you came to WHRO, you were in Harrisonburg.
Oh boy, which doesn't even exist anymore.
Oh really?
Oh yeah, they closed that station down when state funding went away. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. So it can happen. What I'm not sure about, in Virginia, I think, it's going to be a challenge. Of course, the smaller you are, those in rural communities are going to be more impacted. Those in frankly, red states where there's less resources to go to. In Hampton Roads, we've got amazing support. So we've already had conversations with folks that said, if you lost your funding, we're ready with some big dollars to help you. So we understand that. But I can tell you, in Harrisonburg, when I had that station there were no alternatives. And so I've been talking to folks throughout Virginia. Most feel like they're going to be able to weather the storm. Some will have to do some cutbacks. The challenge is, do they have enough membership dollars to pay for the PBS and NPR bills? So that's why, I know our math. Our math works. We get $5.5 million from members, just straight up memberships. That covers our bills. But a lot of stations might not be able to do that. And if they must, the only way they can afford PBS and NPR is with federal dollars. Then how's that shake out for them? Do they exist?
And a lot of these stations also, they provide emergency.
Most of us do.
Yeah.
So emergency services. Our broadcast signal is used as a backup for the region for communications around emergency preparedness, Amber Alerts, things like that. And people forget about all those services because it's kind of behind the scenes, and unless you're in the tech, you don't really know about it.
Yeah.
So when in Asheville, all the tragedies happened there, the flooding, the broadcaster there really was involved in making sure people could communicate with each other and know what's going on. So fortunately, we haven't had to really take advantage of, or I don't know if that's the right word, but to use those emergency services here, but they're in place in case we ever had a horrific weather event in our region.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Greg joins us from Norfolk. Hi, Greg. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
First of all, this show in particular, I think, brings issues to light that other shows just aren't covering anywhere. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
And I never thought I'd see politics play a role in NPR and PBS possibly going away. It's infuriating. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Some things shouldn't be political, but I want to make sure that we make it plain. I just heard him say something that was my main concern, is how do we keep supporting it so that it does continue? I think I'm hearing, which I'm very concerned about, some of the smaller stations and things are probably going to end up going away if they don't get the funding, it sounds like. Is that correct?
Yeah, when you're in a small community, and again, Harrisonburg, I lived there for 5 years, and I know it was like there. You don't have the alternatives. We have some great, amazing supporters in Hampton Roads, and there are people with some significant wealth who love this organization. But there are rural communities that there's no alternative. There's no way to fund those stations, and so when you look to defund PBS and NPR, what you're really doing is defunding, for the most part, small rural community stations. And in a world where we're having more and more news deserts throughout this country where there's no local news, often those stations are the only source of local information for those communities. And then to take away even more from rural America I'm not sure whether that's really the intent here, but that's the effect of what we're talking about.
Greg, thanks so much for the call. We really appreciate hearing from you. Gerald from Zuni apparently got disconnected, but he said he's a supporter. It's not expensive, both radio and television, and we should do everything we can to keep it. So clearly people are looking forward to jumping in and helping. Yvonne, why do you love public media so much?
Just for the education not just for the education, but so much education. I have lived in areas where you had to really have cable to get your basic NBC, ABC, CBS, but we always got a PBS station, and you were able to learn so much as a child. And even as we were growing up, we learned so much. I learned about the national parks, and you're sitting there, you're watching that, and I would love to go there. But I think the people who are making the decisions have never been to the national parks. They haven't put everybody in the station wagon and taken a road trip every August like my family did in August for 2 weeks every single year until we were old enough to say I'm not going anymore. So, but anyway, but you learn those things from there, and it's strictly the education, whether it's academically or whatever, you learn something from it, and it's so important because everybody can't be everywhere.
Yeah. And Heather, we talked a lot about children's programming and how that helps teach young kids the basics. There's some parents that may not have the wherewithal. They've got to work. They need some place to go that they can trust that their children can learn. And now there's also talk within the federal government of eliminating Head Start, which would be another another blow to education for young kids. So take this moment to really sell why PBS kids programming in particular is so important.
100%. PBS kids programming is aligned to teaching children the basics. You're not going to get that when you watch stations, and this is but such as Nickelodeon or Disney. Those are purely for entertainment.
Right.
But when you're watching PBS Kids, your science are a foundation, literacy are a big one, math is there as well, and it's all designed to give children basically a preschool education for those children that are not in preschool classes, because as we know, a lot of those preschools you have to pay for. You have to have the financial means to pay for. Another thing that I think is really great is all of those PBS programs are available to stream for free. They're not behind a paywall. So whether you're a member or not, members pay for this service, but whether you're a member or not, you have access to that. And we have a 24/7 broadcast of PBS Kids, right, because a lot of parents work odd schedules. They may be up at 5 a.m. getting ready and need a safe space to put their children while they hurry up and get ready so that they can watch and learn.
I remember raising my daughter.
Of course.
Right there, while I was in the shower here, you sit here and you eat your oatmeal and watch PBS. Yeah.
With my kids growing up, I remember coming home one day and maybe good or bad memories of Barney. I love Barney. but I came home one day and my daughter walked up to me and she, just like on Barney, said, "I love you," just like they do on Barney. And I knew the impact that TV could have on a child. And then as my kids got a little older and they started getting too old for public TV and they started watching other things, then they started asking for cereals and toys and all the things they'd see in the ads. So I knew they were going into a different world of children's television. There's a difference between having children watch non-commercial television that helps them, be introduced to the world and being introduced to commerce.
Absolutely. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Give us a call. Tell us why you love public media and why it is special to you. Let's talk to Heather in Virginia Beach. Hi, Heather. You're on the air.
Yes, thank you. I love Daniel Tiger. I still watch Fred Rogers and Daniel Tiger and Elmo and Big Bird. I learn lessons, and it's also lifelong learning. And I called in. I get emotional.
I know. It's okay, Heather.
Today is Victory in Europe Day. And my father would still be in a huge convoy in the Pacific until November 1945. But today is Victory in Europe Day. I would have obviously marked it, but not so much as having the BBC NewsHour and Norman Corwin's prayer on that day. And I want everybody, if you can, look up Norman Corwin, May 8th, 1945 broadcast of his prayer that brotherhood, and I will add sisterhood because that's what he meant, is not so wild a dream, and that peace will come for longer. And I'm doing my chores, and I'm learning this for the first time.
Oh.
And I'm going to pass this on, and I hope every prayer place of worship knows this prayer that he composed and that he delivered May 8th, 1945.
Heather, I know that this is very emotional for you, and that connection is right there, and I appreciate that, and I'm glad that some of our NPR shows were able to help you also to commemorate your dad. Thanks so much for the call. We appreciate it. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the future of public broadcasting in light of President Trump's executive order to cease funding for NPR and PBS. My guests include the president and CEO of WHRO Public Media, Bert Schmidt, Heather Mazzoni, Chief Content Officer, Yvonne Allman, Chair of the Board, and Maurice Jones, Vice President of News. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Give us a call and let us know why you support public media. What other questions do you have about the potential federal cuts that are coming? Maurice, the news department is relatively new. And so as you and others were forming the news department and determining how you're going to cover things and so forth, what were some of the things that you had to take into consideration? Not so much fun, definitely funding, but also in terms of the editorial.
Yeah, I think we had to look at what areas we wanted to make sure we were covering, and we wanted to make sure that we were filling gaps in the news, in the sort of news and information ecosystem in the region. So, for example, we're not covering breaking news, right? Because there are plenty of places that are already doing that. We're not covering sports and the latest sports scores because there are plenty of places that are already doing that. But we are trying to make sure that we cover the cities and the counties in the region, that we're covering the business community and the growth opportunities, that we're covering the peninsula as well as the South Side, and that we're doing investigative journalism that requires more than one story, if you will, to tell the whole story. And so we are, looking to be public service journalism that's providing folks with content that's really covering the important topics in their lives. And that's what we had to consider. So we had to consider, hey, what do you want to be? And then secondly, where do you find the talent in order to cover those areas? And so we have, whenever we have a spot open, we do a national search, and we look at journalism candidates that are both in the region and that are outside of the region. And fortunately for us, there's great talent out there in both places. But those are some of the main things that we had to consider and still have to consider as we scale up our efforts.
So how are you getting the word out about the WHRO news to those who are not public media consumers? How do you convince them to come on over and check out what you're doing?
Yeah, so I think a couple of ways. We certainly partner with our own marketing folks in an effort to get the word out about what we're doing to an audience that's just wider than HRO. We're also trying to be in the community, right? We're trying to do events in the community with some of our advisory groups, and I speak to Rotary clubs and others, and we got to do much more of that. We clearly have a product out there every morning at 4 a.m. About 110,000 households get our newsletter of daily news. And fortunately for us, that gets passed around to not just members, but folks outside of our membership. And, we're looking to do more in this space to make sure people know we're here and what we're trying to do.
I know you have to leave us shortly, but how do people get that newsletter?
Well, they become a member, right? That's how they get that newsletter. I know I'm not supposed to be soliciting now, but
Maurice has learned how to do it.
But seriously, you have to be a member in order to get the newsletter?
You can go to the WHRO's website and get it for free. But
sorry,
all
I
our
was
members
just giving a plug.
Yeah, but feel free to be a member. But if you aren't a member and want to get a taste, you can simply go to WHRO.org. There's a quick little place you can put in your name and email, and every morning you'll get the newsletter. And that's been wildly popular with throughout the region, really throughout the state, because again, as Maurice talks about, the investigative reporting is statewide.
That is great.
Just to building on what Bert said, we do not have a paywall, so anybody can go up on the site and they can get access to our news.
That is great.
I should also mention with journalism, this is another piece. Our newsroom has grown only as revenues have allowed. We're pretty conservative with our fiscal handling, so. It started with 3. I actually went to the board back in the day. We worked out a spectrum deal with a company. We had some monies that came in, and I wanted to use a small amount of money that would pay for 3 reporters. And it said, from there, we'll take it and run with it as we can raise money. And so we've been raising money. We're at what now, Maurice? 12 folks on your team?
We're at 12 and growing.
12 and growing. And as revenues allow us to do that, it continues. Now, would everybody like to grow the newsroom faster? Sure, but we've got to do it as revenues allow us to do it. That's the approach we've been taking.
And federal funding does not take care of that. That is from membership and from
we get restricted funds from donors who say, I want to support the journalism that you're doing.
Okay. Maurice, we know you have to go. Thank you so much for joining us. We really do appreciate it. And hopefully you'll get even more folks now tuning in to your newsletter and also checking out news on WHRO.org.
Thanks for having me. I'm going to stay on for about 5 more minutes.
Oh, okay. All right. I just wanted to make sure that you were okay. Yeah. Let's talk to Nat Brown in Williamsburg. Hi, Nat. You're on the air.
Hi, Barbara.
Hi.
What I simply wanted to say was that one of the reasons why I love PBS and even NPR is that when we watch national news, for instance, there's a limited amount of time that they have to give you segments of the news. But NPR and PBS to go much more in depth into the news, which gives me a greater understanding of it. And also, I like the fact that they also present news from Europe. I listen to the BBC News and so forth sometimes, and it's nice to see it's sort of like they're looking at us as a country, and it kind of reflects how they see us as a country versus our always looking out to them, at them. Mm-hmm. So you kind of get it from both ways, and I think it fills in the gap more and presents perhaps a more well-rounded view of the news. But that's one aspect I love about PBS and NPR.
I appreciate the call, Nat. Thanks so much. Nat also volunteers here and really enjoys it. Heather, how do you make that decision that yes, we're going to air BBC or yes, we're going to air something else?
Well, a lot of thought goes into it, first of all. But BBC, we put that on at 9 a.m., many years ago. A long time ago. And it is one of it's very popular. Folks, as Nat said, love to hear the perspective across the pond. Mm-hmm. So a lot of thought goes into it, and it's less so, it's easier nowadays, because I will say before streaming, the only way to get some of this programming was to listen to it on the radio. And now you can get it on demand. Thankfully, like Another View, if you can't listen right now, you can listen anytime because the show will be posted within a couple hours.
Absolutely.
On demand. Mm-hmm. So that has made it a lot easier for us and easier for our listeners and members to get our content.
Okay, let's talk to Christy in Hampton. Hi, Christy. You're on the air.
Hi, good afternoon. I just wanted to share how much I appreciate this station and really NPR as a whole. I'm active duty military, been in for 20 plus years. And every time I PCS to a new duty station, the first thing I do is find my local NPR station because I really find that it gives me a greater understanding of the local community that I'm in. And I really appreciate that, and it's helped myself and my family adjust. And so I just wanted to say, I think it would be a huge detriment if NPR went away. I know I would miss it, and I know a lot of my colleagues would as well.
Thank you, Christy, first of all, for your service. We really appreciate that. And thank you so much for appreciating NPR and the local stations, helping you to get to know your local community as you move around. Because I know that can be huge. Bert, you want to respond?
Thank you for your service, Christy. And she brings up a good point. The stories we're telling today here in Hampton Roads for WHRO are our stories. If you went to another market, they're going to have different stories because they're a reflection of that community. And whether you're in Richmond, this conversation would be different in Richmond. If you're in Roanoke, or you're in California or Texas or Oregon, they're going to be the local stories of the local people. And that's the beauty of what we do in public media is it's really about local stations. It's not about some national thing. Yes, we get national programming. We pay for national programming, but the decisions still are all made here locally with a locally operated board of community volunteers that reflect our community as well. So,
as a matter of fact, WHRO is the only locally owned media station, a company in Hampton Roads.
Owned by 21 school divisions.
Owned by 21 school divisions.
I'm just going to jump on that real quick to say, the thinking behind putting BBC at 9 a.m. years ago was because of the military population here in the area.
So okay.
There you go.
So programming to your audience.
Our audience.
Yeah. Programming to your audience, definitely. Let's talk to Valerie in Norfolk. Hi, Valerie. You're on the air.
Hi.
Hi.
I wanted to say thank you so much because my daughter has done so well in school, and it's down to you guys. She watched nothing but PBS when she was little and just developed this love for learning, and Martha Speaks, and she's at Virginia Tech now. She made straight A's her whole life, and it really was PBS. And I find myself a lot of times when I'm talking to people say, a friend told me, when I play that back in my head, I know the friend I'm talking about was NPR. It was some story I'd heard that made a big impact, and I would just be devastated if NPR went. I will start donating. I never have. But I will now, and can someone please get a hold of Bill Gates and see what he's doing?
Well, thank you so much for, first of all, becoming a new member. So, just go to WHRO.org and click donate, and we'll take good care of you. Absolutely.
The pleasure of leading this organization is to hear stories like that you, as frustrating as times can be running in an organization and the financial challenges and everything that goes with it. When you talk to people in the public and the impact that we make in people's lives, it just makes it all worthwhile.
Absolutely. So I do have a question to ask each of you, because I want to hear it from all three of you. And Maurice, if you're still on the phone, you too.
All right. Let me go first, and then I'm going to jump off.
Okay, let me let you go first. So the other issue that people in the community have been asking me, and Lisa in particular, all the time is, will Another View still stay on the air?
She's trying to work her deal right
now. Exactly. No, but in light of the pushback against diversity, equity, and inclusion that's going on right now, there's been a lot of concern as to whether or not we will still be able to discuss today's issues from an African American perspective. So, Maurice, I'll start with you since you have to go.
I'm not sure I should have volunteered. First one.
He's going to regret volunteering first.
Yeah. All I can tell you is I believe that Another View fills a niche that we have to build, and I'm certainly supportive of it being around in perpetuity. And I know you'll live forever, Barbara.
Absolutely.
That's why I said perpetuity.
Thank you so much, Maurice. We know you have to go.
I'm going to get off.
All righty, you take care.
Right.
Talk to you soon. Yvonne.
It has to survive. I talk to people from all walks of life. That's the industry that I'm in, and all of them make a point to tell me when they listen to Another View and verify some things with me, like I'm the spokesperson. But anyway, people are listening and people are learning from this hour and from this show. So it's definitely something that needs to continue.
Yeah, that is one thing. I take a lot of pride in people telling me, I learned so much. This is something I was never exposed to. I feel like I'm listening to a conversation that I wouldn't necessarily be privy to. So that's a good thing. Heather.
Well, I will say that if we lose federal funding, what we won't lose is our mission to serve the community. And this program does just that. We have produced a total of 2,318 hours of local content in 2024.
Wow.
So think about that. And we have on our website a local content and service report to the community that we have to do every year that goes to CPB to tell them what we're doing and why we're doing it. Mm-hmm. So if anyone's interested, we have those. I think they go 10 years back. But Another View is a sole part of that report and always gets, Barbara, look at this, it gets a picture.
Oh, wow.
Right there.
There it is.
Because it's so important to our to serving the community and what we do.
Yeah.
So.
And this is not, I know this could come across a little bit of self-serving, but it's not really.
No.
Because no, but seriously, only because there is so much pushback and they've been so, people are just they don't know what to expect, and so we're just answering the question. So, Mr. President and CEO,
I feel, whether it's justified or not, a little bit like the father of this show.
Yeah,
that you and I birthed.
We birthed this together
a long time ago. I didn't know what this was going to be, but we asked the community, we listened to the community, and then you took the ball and ran with it. I remember when we were talking about who was going to host the show.
Yes, and I brought Bert an entire list of people that I said, here, these will be great hosts for the show. And he's like, why don't you do it?
There you go.
Like, wow.
And Barbara Ham Lee just came from the ashes, right? So I have great pride in the fact that this show has been around almost as long as I've been around here.
Yeah.
And, I'm trying not to get too political here, but, we've always cared about diversity, inclusion, and equity. I mean, even back in my 30 years ago, looking at our board, as Yvonne knows, we keep a spreadsheet. We look at all sorts of diversity factors, not just race and gender, but skill sets and age. Because you want a board, you want an organization that represents the community. So I've always been about making sure that we have diverse staff, diverse leadership, diverse volunteers, and we want to treat the staff equitably and inclusive. So this whole, I'm not sure we are defining DEI appropriately at times, because I think it's turned into something else.
Yes.
WHRO has always cared about making sure that we are an inclusive organization with diverse perspectives, diverse people's experiences. And so I was a little taken back when Lisa asked me the question back when DEI was first being attacked. I'm like, I hadn't even thought about considering.
Yeah, we both came to you, as a matter of fact, to say, "Hey, what's going to happen?" Because there was so much uproar nationally about what was going on, and so we just weren't.
This show is not about.
Yeah, this is about
doing a meeting a DEI mandate. It wasn't because of the push for George Floyd or any of those things. This show is way before any of that, and it's going to continue way after all this anti-DEI
As a matter of fact, we started Race Let's Talk About It well before, back in 2015.
Absolutely. Right.
So it was well before a whole lot of things happened that were going on. 757-440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Elliot joins us from Virginia Beach. Hi, Elliot. You're on the air.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
First, I just want to say how heartening it is to hear how many people value public radio and television. It is very uplifting. But the reason I'm calling is I hope that if any of my fellow listeners are public elected officials, that they also realize the value of public radio and public television. I listen to a wide variety of news sources, from conservative leaning to liberal leaning, everything in between. And an elected official will not get a fairer shake than they will on public radio and public television. You will get difficult conversations, difficult questions, but you will reach a broader audience. You'll reach an audience that does not just want to be pandered to, that are active listeners. And I hope our elected officials realize not just the value to the community, but the value to them as those who represent us. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Elliot, for the call, and we appreciate that. Bert, you want to respond?
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree, of course. And I do think we kind of live in an era where people like to go to their friendly media source. And so I know it's been a challenge. I've talked to the folks over at the PBS NewsHour, and they sometimes get frustrated because they try to give a variety of voices on the air, and sometimes folks will just go to their safe place in media. And I think that does a disservice for the American people. You want people to hear all perspectives on all legitimate perspectives on a topic, not flat Earth, but legitimate topics. And sometimes people just are afraid to be challenged. They want to have, a friendly interview versus what might be a challenging interview. And really, both sides do that. We'll go to their friendly source versus a challenge.
And that's an interesting point, because even with our roundtable, as you know, we have been trying very hard to bring more conservative African-American voices to the air. And the challenge has been, one, getting them to say yes. And then two, we used a gentleman, our last roundtable last month, and I was a little surprised at the feedback from those who I thought would be more encompassing of a different perspective. So, it goes on both sides is my point. People like the friendliness. They like to listen to those who agree with them.
I think that's a big problem in the commercial media world today is you get bubbles. That's why we have two different Americas. People that listen to conservative media and people who listen to liberal media. Right. And I told Catherine Marr when I first met her, and we were up at NPR last year, and I told her, I said, you will be a successful CEO if you are reaching out to everybody in this country, because that's what public media should be doing, is reaching everybody. Yes, there are reputational
She's president of NPR.
President of NPR. Yeah. And there are reputational things, and I think some people say, I'm not going to listen to NPR, it's liberal, but we have to do our best to make sure that people of all political persuasions realize they're going to get a fair shake. And I know here at WHRO they're going to get a fair shake. And I know Catherine said that she wants to make sure people of all ilks, all perspectives are being heard. And so that's the role that we have of public media. And being not a nonprofit organization, it's just good business sense. I want to be able to raise money from everybody, not just half the population.
Let's see if we can get a couple more calls in, and then we want to talk about, before the end of the show, what people can do to help us out. So let's go to Greg from Whitestone. Hi, Greg. You're on the air.
Well, hi. Thank you for taking my call. I'm a physician. I work between Middlesex County and Newport News, and in my years as a physician, I've recognized the really foundational importance of recognizing diversity, equity, and inclusion in the work that we do, healthcare, and how I can serve as a better physician. I must say, listening to your show has enriched me in many, many ways. So I really wanted to express thanks to you and another view. And thank you for this conversation. It's been very interesting.
Oh, Greg, thank you so much. We really appreciate that. I mean, that's the whole, when we started the show, we said we chose the title Another View because we wanted to give the greater community another view of the African-American community, and frankly, the African-American community another view of itself, because, too many times there's only one perspective. So that means a lot. Thank you very much for calling. Let's see if we can get Dan in from Norfolk very quickly. Hi, Dan. You're on the air.
All right. Thanks for taking my call. Long-time member, long-time listener.
Appreciate it.
You all do a great job. I just had a couple of comments. One is the source of funding. I heard today on your program, or rather earlier, that Bill Gates Foundation, Bill Gates is giving all of his wealth to his foundation, and it will sunset in 2045. So that's an opportunity. There are funding sources out there that are opportunities for public broadcasting to tap into these foundations. I know they're probably already a supporter, but that's a real good opportunity to get additional funding into the future from these large foundations.
Okay, Dan, thanks so much for the call.
I don't know this, but I'm quite sure that PBS and NPR are having conversations with all significant funders, and I'm sure the Gates Foundation is part of those discussions. I can tell you locally, we have similar conversations with our Gates Foundations of Hampton Roads, if you will. So we're always looking to find new sources of revenues and have a number of applications in right now for more funding, and I've talked to some high wealth individuals as well about supporting the organization. Okay,
so every day people listening to us, they want to help. What do they need to do? Do they need to write their congressman? Do they need to become a member? What do they need to do? I'll start with you, Yvonne.
They definitely need to write their congressman, call their congressman or woman, and start making their own contributions. You don't have to give $1 million. We will take $1 million. That would be nice. But, it takes dollars to make that $1 million. So you do not have to, at any level that you give will be important, and it will make a difference in the programming that we are producing.
Okay. Heather.
I'm just going to second what Yvonne says, and tell you that when you become a member of WHRV and O, you not only feel great, and it doesn't matter what level you come in at, you are providing this local content for folks who can't become members right now. So consider that. You're doing this for the community, and we appreciate every single dollar we get. We value it. We value you. But go ahead and make that contribution. As I said, you get a membership glow, right?
Absolutely. You do get a membership glow. I am waiting. You all haven't given the phone number. I can't believe it.
Oh, I know. I'll let Bert do that.
It's not in front of us. We have the cheat sheet during pledge.
Oh, come on. Are you kidding me? I dreamed that phone number during pledge.
So
go ahead, Bert.
I'm not going to do a pledge pitch here. What I want to talk about is because we're still concerned about rescission, that money could be taken away. So I think it's important if it ever went to the House that our local representatives support us and vote against a rescission. So if you go to Protect My Public Media, that'll kind of guide you along the way to be able to send communications to your elected officials. Perfect. Depending, it's geolocated. So if you're in Jen Kagan's district or Bobby Scott's or Rob Whitman's, it'll send messages
to the right place.
I will tell you, and I told him I would make sure. I've seen Bobby Scott a number of times in the last few weeks. Says, please don't send it to me. You know I'm going to support you. So I'll put that right out there because he said, please, when you guys turn the machine on, they get inundated. Yeah. But I have not been able to speak to either Congresswoman Kiggins or Congressman Whitman this year about the issues, and I'd love to be able to get some FaceTime with them to make my pitch for why WHRO is so important to the local area.
So and they love to also hear the stories as to why it's important. Is that correct?
So it's much more impactful to hear from the consumers of WHRO rather than the hired help.
Right.
So I can go in there and I can tell them why it's important, but to hear from the listeners directly to their congressional representatives, that's going to be the impact.
So all of you all, and we got about a minute left, we're all public media. You grew up with it or you became a part of it. And is it something that you think you will fight tooth and nail to make sure it stays with us?
Of course.
Of course.
Yeah, it's more than half my life has been in this business. So,
wow.
Yeah.
You've been working here for a long time. Huh?
Well, I've been 33 years in the business.
And
18
the business
here,
really?
but 33 in the business. Yeah,
that's really special because your family had a business.
We have Ryan's store,
and you decided not to go that route, but to go into TV. Huh?
No, we went bankrupt because of what was going on in family businesses.
Yeah. Heather.
I've spent half my life in public media, and yes, I will fight tooth and nail because it needs to be here for future generations.
Absolutely, Yvonne.
Absolutely, because as we even cut back on history, learning our history, you can learn your history from public TV, public radio.
Thank you all so much for joining me today. I do really appreciate that. And audience, our goal today was to provide you with the facts about public media in general and specifically about WHRO Public Media. Now, if you value the services we provide, please let your voice be heard. If you'd like to listen to this show again or share it among your circle of influence, please visit whro.org/anotherview and download the podcast. You can also find us on any platform you use for your podcast listening pleasure. Next week on Another View, cuts in federal grants to our local food banks and the impact upon those who are food insecure in Hampton Roads. Our theme music is an original composition created especially for Another View by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Jordan Christie is our audio engineer, and Dr. Barry Graham, he stayed busy today answering our phones. I'm Barbara Hamlee. Thanks so much for joining us, and let's do it again next Thursday at noon for Another View.
Support comes from Hampton Roads Community Foundation, carrying out your charitable wishes forever, whether it's helping shelter animals, feeding the homeless, enhancing the arts, or supporting students. Learn more at leaveabequest.org.